The laws that I'll be chatting about today apply where a local authority is responsible for a child's education. So that includes any child in Scotland that's receiving their early learning and childcare funding. So that's normally from the age of 3, but sometimes it can include from the age of 2. It includes any child that goes to a local authority funded school, the primary or high school, and it can also include any situation where the local authority, your kind of city council, fund a place for a child at an independent special school, for example. So those are all the scenarios where this applies. If you've signed in and are listening to us today and that doesn't apply to your child, so for example, if you paid them to go to an independent school, or if you're home educating your child, then the laws would be different in that situation and your children's rights would be different. So please have a wee look at our website. Mohit will share some stuff in the chat as well, but we've got some fact sheets specifically on your children's rights if you're home educating them or if they go to an independent school, and you can have a wee look at those. But hopefully we don't lose too many of you, and most of you think that today is relevant for you. Next slide, please, Mohit. So I've already mentioned it quite a few times and I've been a bit guilty of talking about something without first explaining what I'm actually talking about. So in terms of additional support for learning, the law gives it a really, really broad definition. So it says a child has additional support needs where, for whatever reason, they can benefit from school education without extra or different help to their peers. So notably, it doesn't say in the law anywhere that your child needs a diagnosis to be recognised as having additional support needs. It's really just saying if they need extra or different help compared to what's normally offered to children the same age as them locally, then they have additional needs. Additional needs can be short term, they can be long term, they can change over time, they can often overlap. And one child might have multiple things that are affecting their ability to benefit from their learning. So all of that can be included, and the law is really broad with that. And it's been done on purpose. It's intentional that there's not a requirement for there to be a diagnosis. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples of the reasons why your child might need support. There is no one definitive list or exhaustive list of all the reasons why a child might need support. As I mentioned before, many of these you wouldn't ever appropriately have a diagnosis or would need one. But importantly, even if it's something that your child could plausibly have a diagnosis for, they don't need one to start accessing support if they need it. So that's really important, I think, where there's uncertainty maybe around what things might be going on for your child, if it's unclear professionally what's going on, if there's long waiting lists. So we hear from families every day around AMS waiting lists, for example. We know it's a really difficult position for families when things are maybe tough at school. They agree and their child's referred to get their needs assessed by CAMS, and then they're on a 2 to 3 year waiting list. And it's a big thing of saying, well, what do we do? Like, we need help now. Hopefully, it's a really clear message that I'm sure Donna and myself will repeat throughout this evening, but they do not need to wait. They should be supporting your child now if your child needs the help, regardless of whether the diagnosis is there or not. As I mentioned as well, it's also important to remember that these can all overlap and change over time. So a dyslexic child might need support with their literacy throughout their whole education, but that might be fairly set and stable, but then they might experience a bereavement and for a period need some emotional support around that too. They could fall over and break a leg and need to use a wheelchair for a period, and suddenly some of their classrooms aren't accessible and need adjustments to make sure they can access the full curriculum. Things can adapt and change over time, and the law allows for that and takes all of that into account. Next slide, please. Go ahead. So the law puts the responsibility onto the local authority. It says ultimately it's the education department in the local authority that must make sure children with support needs get the help that they need at school. It would make my job a lot easier if it says, like, this is what every child's support should look like exactly, but it obviously can't do that. Every child's different, every situation is different. So instead, it talks more broadly, and it says that they must provide adequate and efficient support to children, and that support should be based on their individual needs. So it's about taking steps to identify what children's individual needs are, what things are affecting their learning, planning and putting in place supports targeted at those needs, and then keeping things under review. So if their needs are changing, their support is changing to reflect that. So that's kind of legally, it lies with the local authority responsible, but on a day-to-day, it would normally be the school that are providing and arranging support, because they're the ones that are going to be seeing your child day-to-day. Thanks, Bonet. Next slide, please. So, what do we mean by identifying your child's needs? Your local authority must provide support, like I mentioned, based on your child's needs. So the first step really is taking steps to try and understand your child and what things are affecting their learning. And that's one of the things that is often not well understood, I would say, is people think of, like, oh, I need my child to have this set assessment or this set diagnosis that's got a very clear endpoint that says, okay, your child has this condition or this support need, and that's like a clear answer. And it often isn't the case like that. Like, it can often be an ongoing process of listening to you and your child and concerns if things are coming up, if you're seeing your child coming home from school and they're starting to feel really sad or negatively about school, or they're starting to have a meltdown or feeling distressed or challenging behaviours that maybe indicate that something's not quite right at school, or the school's having a big impact on them. It could be observing how they're getting on in class and seeing actually, oh, they're doing amazing in this area, but they seem to be struggling a little bit more with this, and maybe there's a reason why we need to kind of have a bit of a chat or keep an eye and see why that might be a bit more tricky for them. It's to be that kind of ongoing learning process and keeping an eye on things, keeping it under regular review. But of course, there is sometimes a time and a place where a more formal assessment might be needed. For example, if between you and your child and the school, everyone's a little bit unsure or unclear on what things are affecting their learning or how best to help them, then an assessment can be really helpful for that. And there can be lots of potential people that might be involved depending on what the concerns are or what things you're wanting to be assessed. So that's a conversation that you can have with your child's school around, if they're unsure, like, what are the things that they may be struggling with and who might be best to ask for their involvement with. Could it be speech and language? Could it be educational psychology? Could it be CAMS? Like, is there a specific thing that everyone maybe thinks needs a little bit of investigation or looking into, or is it something a little bit broader where you're just saying, well, we can see that they're finding this part of their learning or experience at school difficult and we're not sure why. If you're having that kind of conversation with your child's school, then they can, with your permission, take that forward, put in referrals to other services and stuff. Or if the school aren't looking to take that forward, you also have the right as a parent or a carer to formally ask for your child's needs to be assessed. And that's done by writing to the local authority, additional support for learning contact. We've got all of their contact details available on our website. And I know later on Donna's going to talk as well about other routes to get assessments and diagnosis, because it's not always just needs to be through the school. There could be different ways that are more appropriate in different circumstances, but it's one of the options that's sometimes there and available. Next slide, please. So that was kind of step one before, is trying to understand what things are going on for your child, what things are affecting their learning. The second part then is actually planning on how to try and then help them with those things and put that right support in place.